Joining me now is Toby Gilles. Toby, thank you so much for your time this morning on Sportuccino. We'll talk about more of that in a moment. How is your morning going so far?
Good morning. I have to confess, this is early for me, generally speaking. So I like my Lions, but always happy to talk to you, Richard.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much for the time this morning, Toby. I guess when you're a football commentator, a lot of the time you're doing these late night evening games, the 7:45, the 8 p.m. kickoffs, and then you're home quite late. So I really appreciate your effort this morning. You could compare it to a rock star, really, couldn't you? They normally work late at night.
I don't think I'm much of a rock star.
Well, you might not be a rock star, but you do know your football. So let's talk a little bit more about those Champions League teams. And the draw is on Monday. I think it's 11 a.m. local time. You'll be able to make that in the morning, I think, after a bit of a lie-in. But let's first talk about Arsenal. Group winners for the first time, as I mentioned, since 2011-2012. But it's not that easy pickings now, is it? There's some pretty tough teams to face in that runners-up pot, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, I have to confess, I've been having a little look at it this morning, and 6 potential opponents for them in the next round: Leverkusen, Bayern Munich, Benfica, Real Madrid, Porto, and Sevilla. And you look at it and you think, well, was it worth it after all of that, winning this group? But Arsene Wenger's spoken an awful lot about this. Of course, it's something that he was going to be asked about. As you mentioned, unbeaten. First time that's happened since the year they reached the final. So that's a great start for them. And I think possibly there's a confidence issue about finishing top as well, particularly in a group containing Paris Saint-Germain. So strong, aren't they, PSG? A lot of people think that at some point, with the backing that they've got, the financial backing, PSG are going to be Champions League winners. So for Arsenal to finally top a group and top a group containing PSG, a huge confidence thing for a side that are so frequently questioned about whether they've got that sort of mental capacity to compete right at the top. But also, it's quite a simple message from Arsene Wenger. He said, if we get a really tough draw having won the group, there's considerably less guilt about it than, in previous years. How many years in a row is it that they've been knocked out, before the quarterfinals now against some really, really tough opposition? If you top your group, you can do no more. And if you end up playing Real Madrid, then I can understand his point that simply less guilt about it. If you play Real Madrid, you've done what you could in the group stage. You're very unfortunate. And then hopefully you can see something out against Real. It would be as tough as it could possibly be. And Bayern, of course, as well, finishing second in their group. Such a shock. But, Arsenal will say, we've done what we can. If we face either of those two giants, then what can you do?
Yeah, what do you think about the Arsenal team at the moment? We're talking in December here, and very often the last few years we talk about quite how good Arsenal are and that they could be potential title contenders. Talk even last night on some of the live shows that Arsenal are potential contenders to win the Champions League. Seems a bit far-fetched from my opinion, but then we come around to February, they're knocked out the Champions League, and then they suffer and stutter a bit in the Premier League, and then they finally get their Champions League spot, and you kind of do a bit of a Groundhog Day. It all happens again. Is there a difference to this Arsenal side this year? Is there more belief? Is there more talent? You've got Sanchez and Ozil playing great. They scored 5 at the weekend. They got a big win on Tuesday. Is this a better side? Is there more belief about them, or are we going to get the same again, do you think?
I think it's a better side. I think he's addressed certain issues. I know Granit Xhaka's not exactly played as much as people might have expected when he signed from Borussia Mönchengladbach in the summer. But he has helped to add some steel. I think perhaps that's the position where sort of Xhaka might play and Coquelin and El Neni, where he still doesn't totally know quite how he wants that to be. Obviously, with Santi Cazorla out, in recent weeks, he hasn't quite been able to work that position out. But I think with Cazorla playing, and then one of the others, that's a real fulcrum for Arsenal to go and play. Cazorla's so important to them. I saw a statistic at the weekend, the difference between number of wins or percentage of wins with him in the side compared to with him out of the side is absolutely vast. So it's important that he stays fit. And of course, he's had some tough times with injuries in recent years. But you mentioned Ozil, Sanchez. They've got Perez scoring a hat-trick against Basel in the week. They've got goals suddenly as well. Oxlade-Chamberlain's beginning to come to the fore. Theo Walcott had that little spell earlier on in the season where he was, unstoppable for sort of 4, 5, 6 games. Olivier Giroud is, for many people, not quite good enough to be a title-winning centre-forward or a top-class Champions League winning centre-forward, but he's definitely a useful player to bring off the bench, particularly if Arsenal want to change their famous style that we know they're so capable of playing and go a little bit more direct. I think Mustafi at the back has made a huge difference for them as well. And when they're lacking Bellerin, which at the moment, of course, they are, then you look at it and you wonder who the right back is. But is a right back, going to affect games enough to stop them certainly pushing for a Premier League title challenge at the moment? I don't think it would be too much of a problem. He'll come back eventually. Debussy obviously came back and got a rare game earlier on, or late, I think it was last month, wasn't it? And they've got Jenkinson. So they've cover there, and you can't expect to have absolute top quality cover in every position. But I think there's a belief there. I think there's possibly a feeling that the Arsenal players owe Arsene Wenger, and we don't know how much longer Arsene Wenger is going to be around. I imagine there's a little bit of that. And there seems to be a harmony at Arsenal, which perhaps we've not necessarily seen all the time over the last sort of decade, during which you might argue they've toiled a little bit. I know they've won FA Cups a couple of times in the last few years, but there's something about them. And yet you just mentioned it, Richard. I'm hesitant because there's always a month, isn't there? Or there's always 2 months, or there always seems to be some problems with injuries, or something goes wrong with Arsenal where you go, well, is that a coincidence that happens every year, or are they just lacking in a bit of fortune? And either way, whichever way of those two differentials you look at it, you go, well, that might well happen to Arsenal yet again this season. And there's always a stage, isn't there, where we go, they're going to win the title. This is their year. And then a month later you go, what happened to that? So I'm very hesitant to say, yes, they'll win the Champions League, or yes, they'll win the Premier League. Can they beat anybody on their day? And I mean anybody. I think, yes, they can with a bit of fortune. Will they have enough luck to see them through to a Champions League challenge? I'm not sure. For me, the Premier League is more likely. They're not favourites, but they're in there.
Yeah, Giuseppe Calderon's joined the chat here. I know he's a big Napoli fan, so he'll be pretty pleased that they are in that group winners section. Another team in that group winners section, Toby, is Leicester City. Surprisingly, after that big 5-0 defeat against Porto, they did start it so brilliantly, the group stages. Their Premier League form has suffered because of it. Certainly their away form. At home, they're still doing pretty well. But Toby, looking at the runners-up and everything like that, does a team like Leicester City, do they want a glamour tide? Do they want to be going to face Bayern Munich? Do they want to be going to face a team like Real Madrid? So it's a great day out for the fans and things like that. But it's potentially a really tricky game. Or would it actually elevate some of their players' performances? Obviously they got big wins against big sides last season when they won the Premier League. Or can they actually think a little bit further, going, you know what? Forget the Premier League. As long as we've reached 40 points, as long as we stay up, we can really focus on the Champions League. We would like to face Leverkusen or a team like that. What do you think?
Well, Leverkusen have certainly got some decent players. I mean, I look at their list of teams that they could play. Leverkusen, Bayern Munich, Benfica, Paris Saint-Germain, Real Madrid or Sevilla. It would only be Benfica or Leverkusen that you would, on paper at least, give them any chance of progressing through. I think, I was thinking about it last night, and I thought, given their league form, and obviously we don't know what will happen between now and February when the Champions League returns, I personally think, to me, that the Champions League cannot be important. They cannot be the first team since, I think it's the 1930s. I think it was Manchester City, the last champions to be relegated. And make no mistake, this Leicester team are in relegation trouble at the moment. Serious problems they've got in the Premier League and domestically. And we all rejoiced, didn't we? Football fans, probably around the world, rejoiced at the fact that Leicester were able to win the Premier League last year. We talked about, well, was it a fluke? Was there this perfect storm that helped Leicester go to win a Premier League? And to some extent, it's clear, with no disrespect to them, that there was. But if they were to go down, or even be relatively close to going down, I think we look at it and it's going to tarnish the achievement somehow. If these players end up with a relegation on their CVs as soon as they've won the Premier League, first of all, you question, their desire apart from anything else. You used to hear about Sir Alex Ferguson, say the day that they won the Premier League, Manchester United, he used to question the players and he'd look into their eyes and say, can you go again? Do you want to go again? Is there the desire and the heart to push for another title, to keep going? The Champions League has proven respite for them, from the Premier League, hasn't it? They've embraced it. It's something new. It's something exciting. But the daily grind of the Premier League for me is important. So I would say, personally, if I was a Leicester fan, and I imagine that there's probably not many like this, but when you work in the industry, you sort of start to think a little bit differently. I would say I want the glamour. I want the Bernabeu. I want, to go to the Allianz Arena. Even Sevilla, of course, who have won the Europa League. What is it, 3 years in a row? That's not going to happen again, of course, is it now?
Because they're a tricky side to face in Europe, aren't they, Toby?
So I think I want the glamour. I want to enjoy it. I want to see my team go up against Cristiano Ronaldo and Gareth Bale, or Thomas Muller and Robert Lewandowski, or Edinson Cavani at Paris Saint-Germain. I want to see what they're made of, see if they're capable. Maybe you get that moment where, Leicester hit a new height and they have an incredible victory, even if it's just over one leg, and they end up going out heroically. Personally, I think that's what I want, given the way that the league's going. If they were eighth, I might be thinking differently, because, eighth is probably where many people would have expected Leicester to be in the Premier League. But given the relegation battle, and given that the draw is on Monday rather than much closer in February, by which point we might know whether they're going to be in a real relegation trouble or not, personally, I think go for the big boys, enjoy it, see what happens, but let's focus on the Premier League.
And I think with the Champions League going away for a couple of months, you've got the busy Christmas period, it does give Leicester that time to focus on those Premier League matches. Toby, it's been so great to get your thoughts on everything to do with the Champions League this morning. We've run out of time, unfortunately. Just before you go, can you let us know how we can continue to follow you on social media, on Twitter, and anything else you'd like to plug, please?
Yeah, my Twitter feed is at Toby Gilles. I guess that the main one is certainly for your international viewers. I work an awful lot on TalkSport's international coverage of the Premier League, so you can get involved on that. TalkSport.com or the TalkSport app, or there's various apps around the world where you can hear me and some very, very good commentators commentating on every single Premier League match. So whoever your team is, you can follow them. I also work quite a bit for the Bundesliga as well. So Bundesliga.com, there's English language commentary of 5 games every weekend during the Bundesliga season. Of course, they've got the winter break coming up, so it's mainly Premier League coming up. But if you guys want to get in touch on Twitter, certainly I'm more than happy to chat football.
Fantastic, yes. When I was living in Qatar, I was very often listening to TalkSport's international coverage on the TuneIn radio app. It was great to speak to you today, Toby. Thank you so much for your time. Toby Gilles there, the football commentator.